few hours into the flight, I noticed the man sitting 5 rows ahead of me staring in my direction. I tried to brush it off as paranoia. I was exhausted, and flying always makes me uneasy. The thought of being stuck in economy for 10 hours had me restless, desperate for something to distract myself. But this man, sitting just a few seats away, was making me increasingly uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about him felt off from the moment I saw him. He was already seated when I boarded the plane, dragging my carry-on behind me as usual. I hate flying. I was stuck in the narrow aisle, waiting for the man in front of me to wrestle his oversized bag into the overhead bin, his wife muttering sharp words in rapid Portuguese. I looked away, trying to keep my irritation in check. This was going to be a long flight, and I needed to stay calm. That's when I caught the man's gaze. His face was unremarkable. Brown hair, brown eyes, average build. Nothing about him stood out. He wasn't particularly thin or heavy, and his expression was blank, almost emotionless. I couldn't tell if he was sad, happy, or anything in between. He was just plain. Despite my unease, I offered a small smile. We're all just travelers enduring the same discomfort, right? He didn't smile back. The man in front of me cursed again, now trying to shove his bag under the seat. I watched him for a moment, and when I glanced back, the plain-faced man was still looking at me, his expression unchanged except for a faint crease between his brows, the only hint of any thought or feeling. His face was unreadable, but I couldn't shake the sense that I had somehow caught his attention. I was relieved when I finally moved past him to my seat. I stowed my bag, tucked my purse under the seat in front of me, and put on my headphones, trying to distract myself from the anxiety of flying and the lack of control it brings. From my aisle seat, I could see him, his fingers tapping the armrest as passengers continued to board. Through the crowd, I thought I saw him glance back at me, but once the plane took off, he stopped. I figured it's hard to be creepy when you're trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. He did look my way once, but then he started fiddling with his phone, so I assumed he was distracted. I couldn't place his nationality. The flight was direct from Vancouver to Buenos Aires, so most passengers were either Argentinian tourists or expats like me, returning to visit family. He didn't look distinctly Argentinian or Canadian, but then again, Vancouver has its share of odd characters. Maybe he was just a nervous flyer like me, escaping the rainy West Coast for some sunshine in Argentina. Then it hit me. His phone was off. He'd been holding it for over an hour, tilting it slightly, but the screen was completely black. No headphones, no AirPods, no game or movie playing. For the past hour, he'd been using his phone as a mirror to watch me. I was his in-flight entertainment. Stay calm, I told myself. Showing fear would make me seem vulnerable, and I didn't want to give him that satisfaction. My heart raced as I weighed my options. Most people would say to call out someone making you uncomfortable, and I usually would. But this wasn't some drunk on public transit. I wasn't even sure if he was doing anything wrong, and I didn't want to be the woman causing a scene over nothing. Quietly, I grabbed my purse and headed to the restroom at the back of the plane, but I didn't go in. Instead, I looked for a flight attendant in the galley. "Is there any way to change seats?" I asked. He looked slightly annoyed. It was a full flight, and empty seats were scarce. But when I explained the situation, his eyebrows shot up. The guy in 24C? I felt a flicker of relief. If the attendant had noticed him too, maybe I wasn't just being paranoid. "Yeah, that one." The attendant glanced in his direction, his annoyance shifting to concern. "There's an empty seat in the last row," he said. I thanked him and moved to the back of the plane. The turbulence was worse there, but I felt safer with some distance between us. I settled in, ate the mediocre airplane meal, and listened to a comedy podcast to calm my nerves. Eventually, I even dozed off. When I woke up, my heart nearly stopped. He was standing in the aisle, staring directly at me over the heads of sleeping passengers. This time, he wasn't even trying to hide it. Maybe I should have pretended to still be asleep, but I didn't want him to think he had power over me. "Can I help you?" I asked, loudly, my tone sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. The sympathetic flight attendant approached, but the man didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on mine. Then he smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen from him. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was smug, like he knew something I didn't. Before the flight attendant could intervene, he turned and walked away. The attendant offered to move me again, but I declined. What good would it do? The upside of flying is that there's nowhere to run, but there's also nowhere for someone to escalate things. We had 4 hours left until landing, and for the rest of the flight, he left me alone. I didn't leave my seat either. I wasn't taking any chances. After we landed, I waited until everyone else had disembarked so I could keep an eye out for him. From the back of the plane, I spotted his bright green shirt as he walked away, but he didn't look back. Once the aisles were clear, I thanked the flight attendants and returned to my original seat to grab my carry-on. I wasn't in a rush. My connecting flight wasn't for another 3 hours, but Ezeiza International Airport is notoriously unpredictable. I'd have to go through customs, recheck my bag, and sprint to the other side of the terminal for my domestic flight. It would take at least an hour, maybe more, depending on the crowds. But all those worries vanished when I noticed something while retrieving my bag. The luggage tag was gone. The tag with my full name, phone number, and home address, everything someone would need to find me. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I'm about to board my flight back to Vancouver. But I don't know what I'll do when I get there. I'm scared to go home. From the ages of 9 to 12, I found myself trapped in a deeply unhealthy and manipulative friendship with a girl I'll call Lila. To give you some context, my childhood during the late 2000s and early 2010s was far from stable. My parents were constantly at odds, and both my immediate and extended family struggled with mental health issues and addiction. As a result, I was an anxious, sensitive kid who often gravitated toward unstable people. And unfortunately, they seemed to gravitate toward me too. By the time I was 11, I had become a shy, introverted girl who turned to the internet as an escape. Back then, AOL Instant Messenger, AIM, was the go-to for chatting with friends, and I also dabbled in MySpace and Facebook. Unlike some of my peers, though, I was cautious. I kept my profiles private, never accepted friend requests from strangers, and never shared my location. But even with those precautions, I couldn't avoid the chaos that Lila brought into my life. Lila and I met in elementary school during a time when my home life was particularly volatile. Looking back, I think she sensed my vulnerability and exploited it. At first, she seemed like a typical friend, fun, outgoing, and someone I could confide in. But over time, her behavior became increasingly controlling and cruel. She'd manipulate me into staying up late to visit inappropriate websites, ghost me if I didn't give her something she wanted, or yell at me for trivial things, like failing to master a level in Guitar Hero. There were other things she did that I've since blocked out, likely because of the trauma they caused. My mom never liked Lila. Parents often have a sixth sense about these things, and I wish I'd listened to her sooner. By the time we turned 11, Lila's jealousy began to surface. She was smart, but she resented my academic success and would often make snide comments about my appearance, saying things like, "Well, at least you have good grades since you're not pretty." It took me years to rebuild my self-esteem after her constant remarks about my weight and looks. Now at 22, I can finally say I feel confident in my own skin. But back to Lila. Her jealousy only grew, and she began plotting ways to tear me down. It started in 6th grade. We were inseparable that year, talking all day at school and chatting late into the night on AIM. One evening, our conversation turned to boys, as it often did. I didn't have many crushes back then. My strained relationship with my dad made it hard for me to trust boys. But that night, Lila told me something that changed everything. "Do you know Jake, the guy from our class?" "Yeah, why?" "He likes you." "What? No way." "Seriously," he told me. "Want me to give him your AIM username?" "Yes! Oh my gosh, thank you, Lila." I was ecstatic. A boy liked me? It felt unreal. When Lila said she'd give Jake my username, I was over the moon. At 11 years old, I thought I was about to have my first real boyfriend. Little did I know I was walking into a trap. The next night, I heard the familiar ding of an AIM notification on my iPod Touch. The message was from Jake the Man 99. I don't remember the exact username, but it was something like that. My heart raced. Lila had actually done it. She'd talked to Jake for me. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world. We started chatting, and it was everything I'd dreamed of. We talked about school, our favorite bands, and even the silly trends of the time, like silly bands. I was smitten. Looking back, I realized part of it was because I'd never felt liked by a boy before, and my self-esteem was so low that I clung to the idea of someone caring about me. Plus, Jake was popular. He played sports, was outgoing, and had that rebellious streak that so many girls found appealing. For months, we messaged every night. I was head over heels. But things started to feel off when I tried talking to him in person. At school, Jake acted like he didn't know me. He'd turn away when I approached him, leaving me confused and hurt. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself he was just shy or didn't want to embarrass me in front of his friends. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When I told Lila, she acted just as upset as I was. She promised to confront Jake during music class, and I believed her. That night, Jake messaged me apologizing, saying he'd been dealing with family issues. I forgave him instantly, too caught up in my feelings to question his behavior. Then came April 1st, 2011. Jake had told me he had something important to share. I was a nervous wreck, convinced he was either going to break up with me or make our relationship public. That evening, I was on Club Penguin when I heard the ding. It was Jake. "Hey, babe. Oh my gosh, hey, I've been waiting all day. Sorry, I was at practice. Ready for the news?" "Yes." He sent me a picture. I opened it, expecting something sweet. Instead, it was Lila, holding a sign that read, "Happy April Fool's Day, XD." At first I laughed. It had to be a joke, right? But then it hit me. Lila had been pretending to be Jake for 6 months. She'd created this entire persona, stringing me along just to humiliate me. I broke down, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. Lila reveled in my pain, telling me I was stupid for believing someone like Jake would ever like me. I told my mom, who immediately called Lila's mom. The friendship was over, or so I thought. In the months that followed, Lila tried to guilt me into reconnecting. The most twisted moment came when she messaged me after my birthday, claiming her mom had died in a horrific car crash. I was devastated, until Lila revealed it was another cruel prank. She even sent a video of herself laughing at me. By 7th grade, Lila had teamed up with another girl, Mia, to torment me at school. They'd invite me to sit with them at lunch, only to mock me behind my back. One night, Lila messaged me telling me to kill myself, saying the world would be better off without me. Mia joined in, telling me to jump off a bridge. I finally told my mom, who contacted the police. I deleted my AIM account, and Lila's mom warned her to stay away from me. For the rest of 7th grade, I refused to let Lila win. I sat at the same lunch table but ignored her completely. Mia stopped messing with me after the police got involved. It's been 10 years since I last spoke to Lila. I'm now 22, with 2 bachelor's degrees and working toward a master's in clinical social work. Writing this has been cathartic, but I hope I never cross paths with Lila again. If she ever reads this, I want her to know. Your cruelty didn't break me, and I hope you found a way to grow beyond the person you were back then. In late January, I embarked on a trip to Los Angeles with a group of close family friends. Hailing from a quaint town of roughly 12,000 residents, I had never ventured into a metropolis as sprawling and bustling as LA. The sheer size of the city intimidated me, and I was plagued by fears of pickpocketing, muggings, or even more sinister crimes. Popular media had painted large cities as chaotic jungles teeming with danger, and I couldn't shake the anxiety that came with stepping into such an unfamiliar environment. Thankfully, the trip concluded without any major incidents, but one particular experience left me deeply unsettled. Our journey began with a 6 a.m. flight from our local airport, which was delayed several times due to a severe winter storm. By the time we finally touched down in Denver, Colorado, it was well past midnight, and we were forced to abandon our plans to drive home that evening. Exhausted and eager to stretch my legs, I decided to use the airport restroom. I had avoided the airplane lavatory for the entire flight, so the moment we landed, I made a beeline for the terminal restroom. My friend's aunt, who also needed to go, accompanied me. The restroom was eerily quiet. with only the faint hum of the airport's ventilation system breaking the silence. As I stepped out of the stall, I noticed a security guard standing near the entrance. Her presence struck me as odd because I hadn't heard anyone else enter the restroom, which had seemed completely empty moments earlier. I offered her a polite smile and proceeded to wash my hands, trying to shake off the unease that had begun to creep over me. About 10 seconds later, the sound of a toilet flushing echoed through the restroom. I turned, expecting to see my friend's aunt emerging from the stall. Instead, a man in a dark hoodie with the hood pulled tightly over his head stepped out. His face was obscured, and he moved with a hurried, almost furtive energy. When he noticed the security guard, he immediately averted his gaze, lowered his head, and bolted for the door. The guard followed him, her voice firm and authoritative as she called out, "This is a women's restroom. You're not supposed to be in here." At the time, I was too exhausted and disoriented to process what had just happened. It wasn't until the next day, as I replayed the incident in my mind, that the full weight of it hit me. A man had been hiding in a women's restroom, which was clearly marked with a large, unmistakable sign. The airport had been nearly deserted, with only a handful of travelers scattered throughout the terminal. What chilled me to the core was the realization that I hadn't heard him enter or move around. No footsteps, no rustling, no indication that anyone else was in the restroom. I became convinced that he hadn't actually used the facilities. He had simply flushed the toilet to create the illusion of normalcy. The more I thought about it, the more unnerved I became. What had his intentions been? Why had he chosen to hide in a women's restroom in the dead of night? The security guard's timely intervention likely prevented something terrible from happening. I couldn't shake the thought that I might have been in serious danger, kidnapped, assaulted, or worse. The man's demeanor had been deeply unsettling. He had avoided eye contact and exuded an aura of menace that sent a shiver down my spine. I never brought up the incident with my friend's family, though I suspect my mother might have mentioned it in passing. To this day, the memory of that night lingers in my mind, a haunting reminder of how quickly a seemingly ordinary situation can turn sinister. It remains one of the most chilling experiences of my life, a stark testament to the unpredictability of the world and the importance of staying vigilant, even in the most mundane of settings. This is a tale I often recount from my days as a police officer in a small town. Over the years, I've shared it with friends and family who find it both chilling and unbelievable. Some even joked that it was the reason I left the force, though my family dismissed it as nothing more than a campfire story. Still, it became a staple at gatherings, especially during late-night storytelling sessions. To set the stage, I need to provide some context. About 15 years ago, there was a political group known as the Freedom Alliance. They were known for their strict ideologies and traditionalist views, often associated with long beards and conservative values. During a turbulent period, a leader rose to power through what was framed as a revolution, but was essentially a coup. He labeled the Freedom Alliance as extremists, using it as an excuse to eliminate political opposition. Anyone who fit their description, long beard, traditional attire, was targeted, arrested, or worse. This brings us to the summer of 2011. I had been an officer for about 3 years at that point, and life was going well. I was excelling at my job, and my fiancée had just proposed to me on the very same day I planned to propose to her. It was a perfect moment, until the events of that fateful night unfolded, leaving me with a story that still sends shivers down my spine. It was late June, and I was patrolling Elmwood Avenue with my new partner, whom I'll call Jack. We received a call from dispatch about a domestic disturbance in the area. Eager to show Jack the ropes, I decided we'd check it out. As we drove to the address, I noticed the street was eerily quiet. The houses looked abandoned, as if no one had lived there for years. I brushed it off, assuming it was just a rundown neighborhood. We pulled up to the house, a modest 2-story home with a worn-out exterior. The front door was slightly ajar, which immediately put me on edge. I drew my weapon and signaled for Jack to do the same. Thinking it might be safer to enter from the back, we circled around and found the back door also open. We stepped inside cautiously, the silence of the house pressing down on us. Jack, in a rookie move, called out to see if anyone was home. I shot him a glare. You never announce your presence in a potentially dangerous situation. But it seemed the house was empty. The living room was sparse, with a faded carpet and a few old sofas. Nothing out of the ordinary, so we decided to check upstairs. At the top of the stairs, there were 3 rooms. The first one we entered was well lit, with walls covered in handwritten notes and story ideas. A stack of manuscripts sat on a desk. It looked like the home of an aspiring writer, someone deeply immersed in their craft. I picked up one of the manuscripts and skimmed it. It was a grim tale about a woman from the 1800s who met a brutal end. While I was reading, Jack wandered into the second room. He called me over, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. The room was decked out like it was straight out of the Victorian era. Ornate furniture, vintage decor, everything meticulously arranged. It felt too real to be a mere set for a story. Jack and I exchanged uneasy glances, but decided to keep exploring. The third room was different. The door was closed, and when we opened it, we were met with complete darkness. The room was in disarray, with paint cans and brushes scattered around. It looked like someone had started renovating but never finished. We searched the room but found nothing unusual, so we closed the door and returned to the first room. That's when I noticed something odd, a Polaroid camera sitting on the bed. I didn't remember seeing it earlier. "Was this here before?" I asked Jack. He shook his head, just as confused as I was. As I picked up the camera, it whirred to life, spitting out a photo. The image showed Jack and me stepping out of our patrol car, taken from the window of the very room we were in. My stomach dropped. There was no one in the house to take that photo. Before I could process it, the camera printed another picture. This one showed us in the Victorian-style room, but in the corner of the frame, there was a shadowy figure crouched in the hallway, watching us. My heart raced as I showed Jack the photo. His face turned pale. The camera wasn't done. A third photo emerged, this time of us in the dark room. In the corner, barely visible, was a woman in Victorian clothing, her face twisted into an inhuman grin. How had we not seen her? The camera clicked again, producing a fourth photo. It showed the door to the third room slowly opening, with the same woman stepping out. As the photo finished printing, we heard the creak of a door opening down the hall. Without a second thought, we bolted. We didn't look back, didn't stop to investigate. We ran to the car, jumped in, and sped away. I tossed the camera into the back seat, my hands trembling. By the time we returned to the station, it was nearly midnight. Jack was visibly shaken, and so was I. We had no proof of what we'd seen, just the camera, which I left on my desk. As Jack gathered his things to head home, I noticed the camera whirring one last time. It printed a final photo, one I've never shared with anyone. The image showed Jack and me in the car, driving away from the house. And in the back seat, barely visible, was the same woman, her grotesque grin staring back at us. That's the detail I keep to myself, the one thing I've never told anyone. It's a reminder that some things are better left unexplained.